So in order to make AI models useful and productive for people, you need to be able to not just train the models, but also use them. And that means that you have to be able to deploy them and then integrate them in applications and then use them inside applications. So we call this the full AI lifecycle. And what we will talk about throughout this workshop series is what are the steps of a full AI lifecycle and how do you master those steps? Now, you can build a full AI lifecycle in many different ways, but in this particular series of sessions, we are going to focus on how to do it in the cloud. And this is important from a number of reasons. One is that, as we'll show you, there are a lot of powerful cloud AI services. The second is that they are being increasingly used by different companies. And the third is that because most of these cloud AI services are production grade, it's much easier for you to build a very powerful end-to-end AI using cloud AI services than if you were to try to put together a couple of machines and do it yourself. So any individual can build a production grade AI, and know how to use it, and then that will help you in anything from experimentation that you do to any professional capacity that you might want to do. Then the next thing that we will cover in this workshop series is how to integrate an AI into an application. And we are going to show you one of the most popular and kind of best practices for that integration, which is a microservice-based integration. And we will show you how to do that. So this is what this workshop series of 8 sessions will cover for you. Now, before we get started, you will need 2 accounts to go ahead and do the code labs in this series of 8 sessions. And you please go ahead and start signing up if you haven't already for both of these accounts. Now, what we will do is we will put these links on the chat window. So I think Sindhu will be just putting the links on the chat window. And we will need these accounts to be live in in about 30 minutes once we start the code lab. So please go ahead and sign up for them now so that if we have any glitches and you have any difficulties signing up, that you will be able to have the accounts ready by 30 minutes. And the folks on the chat will help you if you have any difficulties signing up. Meanwhile, I will continue with the presentation. So let me check really quickly. Okay, good. Sindhu is putting together on the chat window. So please go to these 2 links and get yourself free accounts. Now, one thing to note is that if you haven't already gotten an Amazon free account, you will find that they will ask you for a credit card when you try to get an Amazon free account. And they will not charge you for this credit card as long as you use only free services. And we will show you very carefully where the services are not free so that you can make your own decision as to whether or not to use them. So please go ahead and provide your credit card, but we will be very careful in telling you when something might get charged. So now, while that's going on in the background, let me discuss what we are going to cover today in this session. Since this is the introductory session, we will talk a bit about what the full AI workflow actually looks like and about the cloud tools that will be used. Now, this AI workflow that we discussed today will be the one that we will execute throughout these different sessions, and we will follow the same steps, but we will follow them for different use cases. And through that, you will see different algorithms in action and things like that. But it will also help you master the process of the workflow and how to build not just these use cases, but also any other use case that you come up with. We will provide an overview of the cloud tools and how they link together to create a full AI workflow. And then in today's code lab, we will do one use case, which is customer churn, which is a very popular and common use case for many business and many production users. And we will do a hands-on code lab using this use case. So now let's get started on what is the full AI workflow that we will want to execute. And what you will see here is that we will describe this workflow in a slightly abstract way so that the clear steps that need to be followed are kind of listed there. And then we will show these steps in action as we go through the different use cases. So the steps are really, you start by defining what your problem is and what is your business need, or your functional need. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Then you need to get the data ready for the AI. And what happens is that, you will need to source the data from wherever you're getting it, whether it's from a public repository of data sets or whether it's from data from your actual business. But then you have to process the data in a manner that is suitable for the AI algorithms. Next comes the part that most people have studied in a fair amount of depth, which is the algorithms and the training. So you need to develop the models and you need to train the models. And once you have a good model that you like, you need to validate it through a series of validation techniques. So most of this area is covered fairly well in many, many classes because, the different specific algorithms and so forth. And what we will do in these workshop series is we will use 3 or 4 very powerful cloud algorithms that are very versatile and very sophisticated, but they're also fairly easy to use. Now what happens is that now this is where most of the training ends in terms of how to create models. What we are going to show you is how to deploy those models, how to connect them to your application, and then how to iterate so that you can continue to improve the behavior of these models. So the key thing to recognize is that for those of you who are, say, familiar with development practices and understand sort of agile development methodologies and things like that, those things absolutely apply to AI as well. So this cycle that you go through is not a one-time thing. Companies like LinkedIn or Facebook or Google that do this, they iterate over these cycles over and over again for the same use case, every time making a little bit small changes to make the operation of their algorithms better. So now a few quick comments. Why do we want to use the full AI workflow? So first of all, if you stop your AI here, hopefully you guys can see your mouse, you're not going to get any benefit out of it because all you have is an algorithm and it's not being used for anything. So you have to be able to deploy it, connect it to your application, and then use it in order to see whether or not you're actually generating, a benefit. And using a business term, are you generating return on investment? All the effort that you put in, are you gaining anything? So in order to actually get benefit out of AI and to generate value, you have to complete the full cycle. But completing the full cycle is fairly challenging because you do have to do these steps. And these steps typically involve like a production grade integration and production grade deployment. And that's what we will show you how to do today leveraging the cloud. So the next thing to note is that there are many, many sophisticated AI technologies available in the cloud. So you don't have to study every single thing that's on this slide, but the point of this slide is to show you that there's a lot of different cloud tools out there. And what you have on this slide is really each one of these little logos here is a separate AI related product offered by just one of 3 companies, Google, Amazon, or Microsoft. And this is not even all the products that they offer in AI. There is probably, at this point, I would say at least somewhere between 30 and 50 additional products provided by these companies just for AI that are not on this list. And that does not include products, from IBM, SAP, open source, things like that. So the key thing here is that there are a lot of tools out there. And one of the reasons that we've focused on production lifecycle in this workshop is to help you understand how to connect up tools. So you don't have to worry about creating new tools because there are just a lot of tools already. What you need to know is how to connect them and how to get them to work together to do something useful. So let's now think about how to connect these tools. Now, this is an abstract slide that shows you the stack that you need to put together in order to get a full AI workflow functional in the cloud. So, and what you will find is that these are functions and there are tools out there that basically provide these functions. And so what you need to do is to find the right tool, and we will show you a stack that you can use over and over again for, lots of different use cases. But essentially, you have to be able to put together a stack like this. So the first thing is you have to obviously run your computation somewhere. So you have to be able to have, compute, you have to be able to securely connect to it, things like that. And you have to be able to have labeled data. So labeled data means that you have data for which, example data for which supervised algorithms can work. And then you will probably need to do some data preparation in order to prepare that data for suitable for running in an AI context. You do the modeling and the training, and then you do the deployment, and then you connect up your application. So what we will do is we will create this stack, and then you will find that you can reuse this stack to build different types of AI solutions depending on your use case and depending on the kind of algorithms that you might need. So today what we are going to cover, just to be fairly specific about it, is that we are going to take the churn use case, and the churn use case will translate into a binary classification AI problem. So binary classification being that we will want to predict whether or not the customer in question is going to leave or not, and that is the churn. And we are going to use, since this entire workshop series is about AWS tools, we will be linking together AWS tools. So your compute will be running on AWS EC2. Your data will live on AWS S3. And for modeling and training, we will use SageMaker, which is AWS's flagship machine learning toolkit. And for deployment, we will use SageMaker as well as what's called an API gateway to create a microservice. And then we will connect with the microservice through a variety of sample applications. So this is the stack that we're going to interact with, and this is the stack that you will put together as part of the code lab. So now I want to spend a little bit of time describing this concept of a microservice because it is so important to the core of everything that we're going to do. So what happens is that if you think about it, when you have trained an AI, you basically, what an AI does fundamentally is get data and make predictions. So what you have is really a standalone little program that lives to essentially make predictions. And so one very, relatively straightforward and also extremely robust and powerful way to deliver AI predictions is what we call a microservice. So what we are going to do is we're going to create a microservice for every AI that you build. And that microservice is going to run in the cloud and be accessible via a URL. Then what you can do with any application that you have is that anytime you want a prediction, you effectively make a request to this URL and a prediction will come back. And so effectively the integration model kind of looks like these two boxes. There will be a cloud AI service that's running. It's a microservice. It has an API that it exposes, and that API allows you to provide new data and provides predictions. Because this API is a generic REST-based API, you can connect to this with pretty much anything. So it can be, a web-based application, it can be your smartphone, it can be, a built-in web app that we will provide for you so that you can play around with it, and so forth. But this structure that is, this design pattern is called the microservice deployment design pattern, and it is very useful. The reason that it's useful, for example, is that say that I wanted to retrain a model here and I wanted to put in a new model. It's really straightforward for me to add a new model into my microservice and I don't have to change a line of code up here, because the API has stayed exactly the same. If I wanted to connect my application to not just one AI, but several, and I wanted to say combine them or add some logic, that's straightforward because I will do that code up here, and these AI services don't ever need to know that they are collaborating with anything else. So the microservice approach is very convenient in that way, and it's, by the way, used in a vast majority of AI deployments. So the REST-based deployment is a very common deployment pattern, and it works for the vast majority of use cases. There are some cases where it doesn't work, which we'll discuss later in in other workshop sessions, but just suffice to say that for a large variety of use cases, it works really well. So this is the one that we are going to focus on in this series of workshops. So now, really quickly, let's talk about the flow that it takes in Amazon in order to generate this life cycle. So now what I'm going to do is walk through the same thing that we had in the life cycle, but I'm going to show you how it looks in the AWS world. So first of all, we will have a data set and it will live in S3. Then we will do some data operation and transformations, and we will create a version of that data set. It will also live in S3, but it's a version that SageMaker can process. The original is not something SageMaker can process. Then we will use SageMaker to train different models, and we will get a bunch of models out of it. Once we have a bunch of models, then what we can do is create an endpoint, and this entire everything in all three of these blue boxes live to create that microservice that we talked about. So the first step to creating a microservice is to create an endpoint. That's the running program. Then you have to connect that endpoint to the external world so that your applications can connect to it. Then you have to build an API out of it. So once we put together these three boxes, we essentially have a deployed microservice. Postman is just an example of a program that can access that microservice. Postman is a very popular API testing tool. You don't have to use it. And you can put in place of the Postman green box any app that you like. And so this is the flow that ultimately we are going to create anytime we try to build a production AI. So now how will we execute this flow? So we are going to show you how to execute this flow in two different ways. So the native AWS is using native AWS commands to execute these flows, and they will require that you write some data set preparation code, do some AWS configuration, build an endpoint, write a Lambda, a Python function for the endpoint, and so forth. We are also going to show you how to connect to this entire life cycle together via an overlay tool called Navigator, which will do a good chunk of the grunt work that is happening here. So what we will do in these 8 sessions is we will actually show you both of these tools. Now, it turns out that the native AWS tool takes a while to learn. So it will, so what we are going to do is take sections of it in different workshops and take you in deep in each of the sections so that by the end of the 8-session series, you will know how to do all of these steps. We will, because the overlay tool is much easier to use, you can build a lot of end-to-end solutions using the overlay tool, and we will do one per session. So you will come away with a complete understanding of how to do it in both approaches, and then you can, and also how they interact with each other so that you can decide for future use, how you want to do it, and there you can even do combinations. So just a quick overview of the code labs. This is not just for today's code lab, but also the code labs that we will have in the next 7 sessions. We will build 7 production AI use cases, across these 8 sessions. And today we'll do the first one, which is churn, and then we will have 6 others that we will cover in the next 7 sessions. And as I mentioned, you will learn both flows, the AWS native flow and the overlay navigator flow. And we will show you how to use both of them and also how to interact between them so that you will come away from these 8 sessions fully empowered to build it in any way you like. We will show you how to deploy a microservice, and we will show you how to test your microservice with standard test tools that are available to all developers. And this is something you can do to make sure that your AI microservice is working even before you connect it up with your application. And then we will show you also how to connect it up with your application. And we will show you sample programs in Python, Java, and JavaScript. Now, you are also more than welcome to write integration apps in any other language that you like. You'll find that once you see these two in action, it will become very obvious to you how you would integrate it in any other language. So if you would feel like you're interested in integrating in some other language, then please go ahead. And the Slack channel is really useful in this regard, because if you do it, for example, in between the sessions, feel free to post any questions or issues that you have on the Slack channel that Bill mentioned, and we'd be very happy to help you with it. And it should be very straightforward as well. So these are the things that we will do across all of the 7, or 8 sessions. You'll be able to basically build all of these things. Now, what are we going to do today? Today, we're going to make sure that you have your AWS account set up. You will connect it up with the Navigator overlay tool, and we will build a full end-to-end churn use case. So that's what we are going to be doing for the next 1 hour. And my colleague Sindhu will take you through that process. And our goal is to have everybody be able to do this functionally today. If you are not able to for some reason, then you can definitely do it after the class is over, and we can, between now and Friday when we have the next session, you can just send us any questions that you have and make sure that this part is something you can complete on your own before the next session starts. So now, before I get into the details of the code lab, I'm going to spend a few minutes telling you about this use case that we're going to build. So the first thing is, what is churn? What is the churn use case and why should we care? So churn is effectively trying to understand whether a customer is going to stay with you or whether it's going to leave. And almost every business has this problem. So you have customers, you want them to stay for as long as possible, keep buying new things, continue to subscribe and things like that. And you definitely don't want them to leave without expecting it, because that can result in, it'll break your revenue projections, you'll lose money, things like that. And so it's very important for businesses in general to understand both what is going to happen, how many customers they can expect to churn, and to try to get as much advanced warning as possible before a customer leaves. And if you get a warning that a customer is susceptible to churn, then you can do a bunch of different things. You can have your customer service people call them. You can give them maybe some offer or some incentive to make it better. Try to understand, whether or not there's something else you can do to make them happy, things like that. So predicting churn is a very useful thing. For large companies, churn may not even be limited to customers. Very large companies, for example, are interested in employee churn. Every time an employee leaves, first of all, they have to recruit another one. They have a gap in productivity. The investment that they made to train that employee is a lost investment. So large companies, they may not even just be interested in churn from a customer perspective. They are interested in it from a partner-employee perspective. So it's a very useful problem to learn how to solve. Now, how do you use AI to manage churn? You can use AI fundamentally to predict whether or not a customer is likely to leave, to identify at-risk customers, try to figure out what makes people who leave different from people who stay. Like, what is it about them? Is there something about your product that, hits them the wrong way? And if you can figure out why they left, or what, the people who left, what do they have in common that the people who did not leave do not have, that can help you figure out how to fix your problem. So typically speaking, this kind of, churn data comes from customer history, details about the customer, things like that, and you're trying to predict who is at risk. So here's an example data set, and this is the data set that we will use today in our end-to-end deployment. And this is an open source data set from Kaggle. So as part of the code lab, you will actually take this data set from Kaggle and go ahead and bring it into your environment. And this is just a quick synopsis of what it looks like. It really essentially has a customer ID, some information about the customer. Since this is a bank churn example, it has customer information like their credit score, their age, how much money that they make, how many products have they been using, how long have they been with the bank, stuff like that. And then what you do is you try to use these to try to predict the last column, which is 1 or 0, which means essentially churn or no churn. So this is a very canonical example of what a churn data set could look like. And you can clearly see that you could replace it with any other column that matters to you. So now, before we start the hands-on code lab, just a few quick comments before I hand over to my colleague Sindhu. Just a reminder again that Amazon requires you to enter a credit card, even though the exercise uses free tools. So please do enter a credit card, because otherwise your account will not work. There is a small part of the exercise that if you do it will cost about 10 cents. We will tell you up front that that's happening. You are more than welcome to not do it if you're not comfortable with it. But we will provide you instructions if you want to try it later. If you have any kind of a problem while the class is going on, please send a message to the chat. A whole bunch of us are there to help you. As Bill mentioned, if you are trying out any part of this exercise or anything else afterwards, please go to the Slack channel. We'll be there as well. So now what we're going to do is to switch over to the code lab, and I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Sindhu, who's going to pick up and and basically take you through the steps of the code lab. Thank you, Nisha. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So Hopefully all of you can see my screen now. So this is the aiclub.world link that I had also pasted in the chat window. However, I pasted the link for sign up. So I'm going to paste this link as well in the chat so that all of you can see it and use it. So it appears in the chat right now. And once you get here, you have a chance to sign in to the account that you just signed up for. And when you sign in, what happens is your sign-in account will appear over here, and there is a tab called Navigator. And if you click on Navigator, that will take you to the screen. Once you get to this screen, the next step is to link your AWS account to Navigator. So why are we doing this? Why are we linking it? The idea is so you can proceed with this code lab without linking your own AWS account also, but there is a disadvantage if you do that. So if you don't have an AWS account and you use Navigator inbuilt, then what will happen is you will still launch all the services on Amazon. However, it will not be your own account and you will not be able to see them working natively in AWS. And since in this series, what we are trying to do is show you how you can use these tools natively in AWS, as well as in Navigator. It will be useful if you link up your account. So I'm going to show you how you can link your account right now. So you go to settings, and in settings, there is a tab called AWS account under link cloud account. So you click on AWS and that takes you to this screen. Now on this screen, the first thing you do is click on this to log into your AWS account. So you click on this link, and when you click here, that opens this screen for you. Or if you have not logged in into your AWS account, then it will ask you to log in. And as soon as you log in, it will take you to a screen that looks like this. I'm going to pause here for 10 seconds so that all of you have a chance to log into your AWS also and see the screen. If you have any questions, please type your questions in the chat window. Okay, so once you get to this screen, you can follow the steps exactly that are listed over here. So what you do is you highlight another AWS account tab and copy this account ID. So if you click here, that copies it. Okay, and you paste that here. Okay. And then here, as you can see, this option require external ID has been enabled. So you do the same thing over here. Just enable that. And that gives you some information and it asks you for an external ID. Now that external ID is listed over here. So you again click on this copy and that copies this external ID for you, which you can paste over here. Okay. I'm going to show you this. Okay, so once you have done that, you click on this tab, next permission. So that was step one, right? So I'm going to show you how it manifests here. Okay, so this is where you get after you finish step one. Now here, you need to type IAM in the filter policies. So that will make sure that IAM full access pops up for you. So I'm going to show that live over here. So what I do is I go to the search bar and I click IAM. And as you can see, IAM full access has popped up over here. So I'm going to